Summer was hot and long in the Middle Ages. Without fans or cool air, people still found ways to stay cool. They used simple tricks that helped them handle the heat and get through each day. When the mercury climbed in medieval times, peasants couldn't exactly flip on the air conditioning. Instead, they completely rethought when and how they worked. Their morning alarm? The rooster, nature's most annoying snooze button that you can't turn off. Rise and shine happened incredibly early during heat waves. We're talking 4 or 5 in the morning. The air still held the coolness of night, and the sun hadn't yet turned the fields into nature's frying pan. If you think getting up for an 8 a.m. class is rough, imagine waking up at 4 a.m. without coffee. By starting so early, they could tackle the most physically demanding chores before the day turned brutal. Plowing and harvesting were exhausting even in good weather. Do that work at noon in 110-degree heat? That's not farming. That's self-barbecue. Studies show traditional farming communities can complete nearly 60% of their hardest labor before 10 a.m. during summer. When the clock struck around 11, everything changed. The hottest part of the day had arrived, and with it came what modern Spaniards call a siesta, though medieval peasants probably called it not dying of heat stroke time. From 11 until 3, the fields emptied out. This wasn't laziness, it was survival. Instead, peasants retreated to the coolest spots they could find. Finding the perfect shady spot was basically medieval air conditioning, except you had to chase the shadows as the sun moved. During these midday breaks, women might spin wool or prepare cool meals. Men might repair tools or weave baskets. Children might collect water from the well, a chore that medieval parents could pitch as, at least you get to stand by the cool well while the rest of us sweat indoors. The medieval peasants' understanding of daily temperature patterns was remarkably accurate. Generations of experience had taught them exactly how the day would unfold. The Weather Channel would have had 0 viewers in medieval times. Everyone was already a weather expert by necessity. Around 3 or 4, as the worst heat began to ease, peasants emerged for a second shift of work. These later hours were for less strenuous activities, feeding animals, gathering eggs, or preparing the evening meal. This schedule wasn't a cultural preference. It was found across medieval Europe wherever high temperatures were a problem. From Spain to Hungary, peasants adopted similar patterns because they worked. When the sun set, sleep came early. After all, tomorrow would begin at dawn again. Nobody was staying up to binge-watch medieval Netflix, which would have just been a guy telling stories until everyone fell asleep anyway. Of course, changing when you worked wasn't the only trick medieval peasants had for beating the heat. Sometimes they needed to escape the sun completely. When the scorching heat became too much even with a clever daily schedule, medieval peasants had another cooling trick. They went underground. The earth itself became their natural refrigerator in the form of dugouts and cellars. These underground spaces weren't fancy, but what they lacked in style, they made up for in cooling power. These were the original basement man caves, except without the flat-screen TVs and dartboards. A dugout was exactly what it sounds like, a space dug into the earth, usually into a hillside when possible. These earth-sheltered rooms maintained a steady temperature year-round, typically hovering between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Even when the outside world was baking at over 100 degrees, these underground chambers stayed refreshingly cool. 6 feet below the surface, ground temperature remains nearly constant regardless of wild swings in air temperature above. Modern studies of traditional earth-sheltered homes show they can be up to 30 degrees cooler than the outside air during extreme heat waves without any mechanical cooling. Walking into a medieval dugout on a scorching day would feel like stepping into an air-conditioned supermarket, minus the awkward small talk with people from high school you're trying to avoid. Constructing these cool retreats took serious effort. Peasants would dig horizontally into a hillside or vertically down into flat ground. The walls were often lined with clay, stone, or packed dirt. Overhead, they used wooden beams, sometimes covered with layers of moss, thatch, or more dirt for insulation. The entrance typically faced north whenever possible, away from direct sunlight. Some dugouts even included primitive ventilation systems, small air shafts that created gentle air circulation without letting in heat. While food storage was their primary purpose, during heat waves, these underground spaces became literal lifesavers. Families might retreat to their root cellar during the hottest hours. Children were often sent to fetch items from the cellar, a chore that mysteriously had many volunteers during July and August. Many medieval homes also incorporated semi-subterranean designs, with floors dug several feet below ground level. In regions with extreme temperatures, some dwellings were built partially underground. These earth-bermed houses stayed cooler in summer and warmer in winter, medieval climate control at its finest. The temperature difference could be dramatic. On days when the air temperature climbed to 110 degrees, the dugout might remain a comparatively chilly 60 degrees. A 50-degree difference achieved without a single watt of electricity. Medieval real estate agents would have had very different selling points. This lovely dugout features all-natural cooling, excellent root vegetable storage, and is conveniently located just 20 steps from your main pig pen. Archaeological evidence of these cooling structures exists across Europe, with particularly sophisticated examples in Mediterranean countries where summer heat was most severe. Some dugouts from this period show evidence of water channels running through or near them, adding evaporative cooling to their temperature-regulating qualities. Underground spaces helped medieval people beat the heat, but sometimes they needed cooling solutions that worked above ground too. Medieval peasants couldn't exactly throw on a tank top and shorts when temperatures soared, yet their clothing choices were surprisingly effective at managing heat, much more so than you might expect. The secret? It all started with linen. This wonder fabric made from the flax plant was the medieval equivalent of modern athletic wear. Almost every peasant owned at least one linen undergarment, a shirt for men or a chemise for women. These base layers served a crucial purpose. They absorbed sweat and allowed it to evaporate slowly, creating a natural cooling effect directly against the skin. When it came to summer wardrobes, medieval peasants were living the business on the outside, party on the inside lifestyle, centuries before the mullet haircut tried to claim it. Linen truly was a remarkable fabric for hot weather. Studies of traditional linen garments show they can feel up to 7 degrees cooler than modern cotton, and as much as 15 degrees cooler than polyester when worn in direct sunlight. The flax fibers have natural wicking properties that pull moisture away from the body. Over this base layer, peasants typically wore looser outer garments, often made of lightweight wool. Before you gasp at the thought of wool in summer, remember that not all wool is created equal. Medieval peasants used thin, loosely woven wool that breathed surprisingly well. The loose fit of these garments was intentional, not a fashion statement, but a cooling strategy. The space between clothing and skin allowed air to circulate, creating a microclimate that helped regulate body temperature. The counterintuitive brilliance of medieval summer clothing was that it actually covered most of the body. Long sleeves and hems protected skin from direct sunlight while still allowing sweat to evaporate. In regions with the hottest summers, clothing was often nearly all white or very light-colored, reflecting rather than absorbing the sun's rays. Head coverings were especially important cooling tools. Women wore lightweight linen veils or caps, while men donned straw hats or simple cloth caps with brims. Medieval peasants knew what modern dermatologists keep telling us: a good hat is worth 10 bottles of sunscreen, especially when your sunscreen options were basically olive oil or nothing. Footwear followed the same cooling principles. When possible, many peasants went barefoot during the hottest weather. Direct contact with cool earth or stone floors helped lower body temperature. For work requiring foot protection, thin leather sandals or shoes with ventilation holes were common in summer months. Multiple thin layers that could be added or removed throughout the day meant peasants could adjust their clothing as temperature and activity levels changed. This modular approach to dressing is something modern outdoor enthusiasts still use for temperature regulation. Imagine a medieval fashion influencer. Today's summer look features my favorite twice-buck linen chemise paired with my artisanally loose-woven wool kirtle. Don't forget to subscribe to my illuminated manuscript for more hot weather tips. Medieval clothing choices showed remarkable ingenuity in managing heat. But fabric and fashion were just one piece of the survival puzzle. When the temperature truly soared, peasants turned to other clever strategies that made all the difference. Beyond schedules, dugouts, and clothing, medieval peasants developed specific habits that helped keep their bodies cool during extreme heat. These everyday techniques required no special tools, just an understanding of how the human body responds to temperature. One of the simplest yet most effective cooling habits was controlling movement. During the hottest parts of the day, peasants deliberately slowed their pace. Fast movements generate internal heat, while moving slowly reduces the body's heat production by as much as 30%. You could always spot the newcomers to a medieval village during a heat wave. They were the ones hurrying through tasks while the locals moved like they were swimming in honey. The way peasants positioned themselves was equally important. They frequently sat directly on cool surfaces like stone floors, packed dirt, or clay tiles. Direct contact with these cooler materials allowed body heat to transfer away through conduction, a process much more efficient than air cooling. For immediate relief, medieval people used wet cloths strategically placed on pulse points, especially the wrists, neck, and temples. Modern cooling research confirms that these specific body locations cool blood most effectively. A wet cloth on the neck can reduce core body temperature by nearly 1 degree in just minutes. A medieval mother applying cool cloths to her children's wrists during a heat wave was essentially using the same cooling technology as those fancy 21st century cooling wristbands, just without the marketing budget. Medieval people also mastered the art of finding and creating shade. They carefully mapped mental routes through their villages that maximized shade coverage. Pathways between buildings, under overhanging roofs, and beneath large trees became high-traffic areas during hot days. Breathing techniques played a role too. Medieval workers often practiced breathing through the nose rather than the mouth during hot weather. Nasal breathing humidifies and cools incoming air more effectively than mouth breathing. Going barefoot was common during extreme heat. This allowed direct contact with cooler ground surfaces and eliminated the heat trapped by footwear. For those working in fields or on rough terrain, thin sandals were removed whenever possible during rest periods. Knowledge of cooling routes and locations became valued community wisdom. Certain spots earned reputations as the coolest places in a village, often located where underground water ran close to the surface or where natural terrain features created consistent breezes. Medieval villages had their own cool kids table. It was literally wherever the temperature happened to be lowest that day. The accumulation of these small habits created a comprehensive approach to body cooling that required no technology beyond careful observation and generational knowledge. Medieval peasants might not have understood the thermodynamics behind their cooling techniques, but centuries of trial and error had perfected methods that worked remarkably well. These physical habits were just one part of a complete medieval cooling system. Beyond how they moved their bodies, peasants had additional clever tricks up their sweat-soaked sleeves. What you eat and drink can make you feel hotter or cooler. And medieval peasants knew this fact very well. Their food and beverage choices during heat waves weren't just about taste or hunger, they were strategic cooling decisions. Let's start with their drinks, because staying hydrated was just as important then as it is now. But medieval peasants couldn't just open the fridge for an ice-cold beverage. Instead, they relied on several clever alternatives. Small beer was a summer favorite across medieval Europe. Don't let the name fool you. This wasn't the strong stuff that got you drunk. Small beer was a very low alcohol drink, often less than 1%, brewed quickly and consumed while still young. During hot weather, it was kept cool in underground cellars or deep wells. The slight fermentation made it safer to drink than plain water from questionable sources, while the low alcohol content meant it hydrated rather than dehydrated the body. Medieval small beer was basically their version of sports drinks, minus the neon colors and million-dollar celebrity endorsements. Even more refreshing was pasca, a drink made from water mixed with vinegar and herbs like mint or sage. This ancient cooler dates back to Roman times and remained popular throughout the medieval period. The acidity from the vinegar helped prevent harmful bacteria growth, making it safer than plain water, while the slight sourness created a sensation of coolness on the tongue. Studies of traditional cooling drinks show that diluted vinegar beverages can create a cooling sensation that lasts up to 15 minutes after drinking. Many peasants also collected morning dew to drink. A surprisingly smart move. Water collected from plants just before dawn was naturally cool and relatively clean compared to stagnant water sources. Dew collection was often a task given to children, who would go out very early with clean cloths to wipe dew from large leaves, wringing the moisture into containers. For those near clean water sources, medieval people would submerge sealed clay jugs of drinking water in flowing streams, creating a natural cooling system that kept water 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the air temperature. Clay vessels themselves helped with cooling through evaporation. As small amounts of water seeped through the porous clay and evaporated from the outer surface, the contents inside stayed cooler. When it came to food, medieval peasants naturally gravitated toward cooling options during heat waves. They avoided using cooking fires during the hottest hours, which would have turned their small homes into ovens. Instead, they prepared dishes in the cool early morning hours that could be eaten at room temperature later. Cold soups made from pureed vegetables, stale bread, and herbs were common summer meals. These weren't just convenient, they were genuinely cooling to eat. Cucumber, sorrel, and borage were favorite ingredients for their naturally cooling properties. Medieval medical texts specifically recommended these foods for cooling the blood during hot weather, and modern nutritional science confirms these plants contain compounds that can create a cooling sensation. The medieval version of meals in minutes was grabbing cold pottage that had been sitting around all day. No microwave needed. It was already at the perfect temperature of not going to make me any hotter. Preservation techniques adapted during hot weather too. Summer cheeses were made smaller and less aged than winter varieties, requiring less salt and resulting in a higher moisture content, more hydrating during hot weather. Fruits like berries and early apples were often crushed and strained, then mixed with a little vinegar or whey to create refreshing fruit drinks that would keep for several days without spoiling. Spices played a surprising role in medieval cooling strategies. While we might think of spicy foods as warming, medieval people consumed certain herbs and spices specifically for their cooling effects. Mint was the cooling champion, added to everything from drinks to desserts during hot weather. They also used fennel seeds, coriander, and rosewater, all believed to cool the stomach according to medieval medical texts. Medieval herb gardens were like their pharmacy, grocery store, and air conditioning system all rolled into one. Meal timing changed during heat waves as well. The heaviest meal of the day would shift to either very early morning or late evening when temperatures were lower. During the hottest part of the day, people ate light, moisture-rich foods that required minimal digestion, as they correctly observed that heavy digestion generates body heat. Food and drink were just part of the cooling puzzle. Medieval peasants had even more clever tricks for staying comfortable when the temperatures climbed to unbearable levels. Water was medieval Europe's most valuable cooling resource, second only to shade. While today we might take running water for granted, medieval peasants developed remarkably creative ways to use this precious liquid for temperature control. The most direct approach was also the most effective: get wet. Medieval peasants would often wade into streams, ponds, or rivers during extreme heat, but with a twist that modern swimmers might find strange. They frequently kept their clothes on while doing so. This wasn't about modesty, it was about extended cooling. Wet garments, especially linen, would continue to cool through evaporation long after leaving the water. Records from several medieval heat waves describe entire villages spending midday hours partially submerged in nearby waterways. In regions where natural water bodies weren't available, communal cooling pools were sometimes excavated specifically for summer use. These simple basins, often lined with clay, collected rainwater or diverted stream water for cooling purposes. Medieval swimming lessons were pretty straightforward. Step 1, find water. Step 2, get in. Congratulations, you've graduated. Just try not to drown. For those who couldn't leave work to take a dip, a quick head or foot dunking provided targeted relief. The head, feet, and hands lose heat faster than other body parts due to their extensive blood vessels close to the skin. Medieval workers would often keep a bucket of water nearby just for occasional hand or foot immersion. Wet cloths were another universal cooling tool. Testing of traditional cooling methods shows that a damp cloth at the back of the neck can lower perceived temperature by up to 8 degrees. Medieval peasants would drape wet cloths around their necks or over their heads, refreshing them whenever they dried out. Drawing water from deep wells was another cooling strategy with dual benefits. Well water pulled from depths of 30 feet or more maintains a constant cool temperature of about 55 degrees year-round. Not only was this water refreshing to drink, but the containers themselves became cooling tools. Getting assigned to water fetching duty during a medieval heat wave was like winning the lottery. Oh no, I have to go to the cool, shaded well again. What a terrible chore. Home cooling relied heavily on water too. One widespread technique involved hanging dampened cloths over doorways and windows. As breezes passed through these moistened barriers, the air was cooled through evaporation. This primitive evaporative cooling could drop indoor temperatures by several degrees in dry climates. Clay water containers played a dual role in home cooling. Unglazed clay pots allowed small amounts of water to seep through and evaporate from the outer surface, cooling the remaining water inside. These porous vessels were often placed at strategic points around living spaces to create cool microzones within a home. Some medieval homes in hotter regions incorporated architectural water features. Shallow water channels might run along the perimeter of a main room, slightly cooling the air through evaporation. In more sophisticated dwellings, these channels might even connect to an external water source, creating a constant cooling flow throughout the living space. Floors were sprinkled with water multiple times daily during extreme heat, with the evaporation providing additional cooling. Sleeping mats and beds were sometimes dampened before use, though only enough to cool without becoming uncomfortably wet. In communal areas, shade and water combined to create cooling zones. Trees that cast dense shade were often chosen as sites for community wells or water storage, creating naturally air-conditioned gathering spots. For outdoor work that couldn't be paused during heat, water-soaked canopies would be erected to provide both shade and evaporative cooling. Medieval pest control and cooling were sometimes achieved simultaneously. The same water sprinkled on floors for cooling would also keep down dust and discourage insects. Talk about multitasking. Medieval water cooling techniques weren't just clever, they were surprisingly effective. Modern recreations of these methods show they can reduce perceived temperature by 15 degrees or more in hot, dry conditions. These water-based approaches, combined with all their other cooling strategies, made surviving even the most extreme heat waves possible without any modern technology. The medieval toolkit for beating extreme heat was remarkably complete. From dawn to dusk scheduling to underground retreats, from specially designed clothing to strategic body cooling, from carefully chosen foods to creative uses of water, medieval peasants had assembled a comprehensive heat survival system through centuries of practical experience.